I call the stories before 1980 precursors to the plowshares. And I've been faulted by that, by another review, because they stand on their own, you know. They're not just there because they led up to the plowshares movement. But I have, in both books, lots of stories about plowshares. Plowshares people believe that some property is improper. Draft buys are improper. Draft cards are improper. And that's what people acted upon nonviolently during the Vietnam War. Nuclear weapons are improper. As Dan Berrigan said, they don't have a right to exist. And that's the basis for the plowshares movement, where they beat swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, which is from the Old Testament, which a whole lot of people know, even if they're not Christians or Jewish. So I have a big chapter on the plowshares, and also on the Berrigans and Jonah House, which were the mothers and fathers of the plowshares movement. Tonight we have one of the plowshares activists with us, Bill Frankelstreit, a Little Flower Catholic worker out, how far away is it, Bill?
It's only about a 45-minute drive from here.
Yeah, in Louisa, Virginia. I interviewed his wife for the first book, but she wasn't married yet. She was living in a Catholic worker in DC, and that's where they met. And Bill changed, I think very much for the better, from a Roman Catholic priest to a Catholic worker, father, and giver of hospitality. And I've just learned tonight he's now a father of 5 children instead of 2. Right?
It's actually 6.
6. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill and let him tell the story of his plowshare movement that he and his, that she wasn't even his wife then, they did it when they were just engaged, did up at Griffiths Air Force Base. And I'm going to let him tell the story, and he can either read it as it's in the book. He and Sue did it together, and interviewed the interviews together, or just tell it, whichever way he wants.
Yeah, actually I'm not in that book. I think I'm in this
Probably
book.
more in that. Okay.
Thank you. We found out we were going to be, Sue and I were on the flyer from Ryan in the park on Sunday. We didn't actually know it until then, but so here I am. And I know there's a lot of familiar faces, and maybe somebody has heard some of the story before. But stories are great to tell. In fact, I was, I remember one time up in DC, we were arrested around the Guantanamo stuff, trying to close down Guantanamo, and we had literally shut down the Supreme Court with about 40 of us arrested inside and about an equal amount on the outside. And the police were determined to keep us overnight, even though we were kind of really stretching the system in DC. And they would just kind of grab a handful of people and put them on a van and drive them to a precinct in DC somewhere. And so they just counted out 9 guys, and I was with these people, and they sent us out to a precinct. And if any of you have spent the night in jail, just, you know, like, ready to be processed, it's most uncomfortable. It's better to get to the feds where you actually get a bed, and, you know, the downside is you're doing longer time. But if it's only an overnight, sometimes you're in a rather uncomfortable holding cell, which is the case here. And there was 9 of us, and luckily, there were 8 new people arrested who I didn't know before, 8 young guys. And as the night wore on, we were in this holding cell they call a bullpen, and very small, and it had a picnic table bolted to the floor, a little toilet in the corner, and lights on, fluorescent lights on all night. And these guys, when they get tired, they would say, "Hey, Bill, you got another story?" And so it was great because you know, a lot of people have heard my story. Shelley has heard all these stories, and other people have heard a lot of stories. And so, but as I'm looking around the room, I don't know a lot of new faces. So you can tell about this story. It was, and interesting with this group here, everybody kind of remembers the first Gulf War back in 1991. It's getting to be a point where I start talking to groups and people say, oh, I wasn't born yet, or I was 2. But if you remember, leading up to the first Gulf War, it started to, I guess it was on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, wasn't it? January 15th was when they started bombing Iraq. This is the first time around. And as Rosalie said, a lot of planning goes into these. The government calls it conspiracy and charges accordingly because conspiracy means to breathe together. And so there are 4 of us who call ourselves the ANZUS Plowshares. And the reason was that there was a man, Kieran O'Reilly, from Australia. I don't know if any of you do computers and all, you may have come across him. He's deported from this country now, but he's done a lot of activism in England and Australia, where he's from. And there was a young woman, Moana Cole, from New Zealand, and Sue and I from the US, so ANZUS. And if you remember too, ANZUS was a nuclear war pact between New Zealand, Australia, and the United States. And it was unilaterally disbanded by the United States when New Zealand adopted a nuclear-free constitution. David Lang, I think it was? Lange, is it? I don't know if you remember him. Anyhow, so we called ourselves the ANZUS Plowshares. And on New Year's morning, 1991, we went to Griffiths Air Force Base up in Rome, New York, not too far from Utica, very cold. And Karen and Moana had both overstayed their visas, and they had like this one shot at doing this action. And when we had scoped the base, again doing a lot of casing of the joint, we found that the B-52 bombers, and we wanted to target the B-52 bombers for 2 reasons. One, it was the first strike nuclear weaponry, and second of all, from all our research, what was it? Center for Defense Information. Is that still around? Yeah. It was by a lot of ex-military people who were really not necessarily pacifists, but were against war making and all. And they had put out a study that they thought it was going to be an air war, and that the B-52s would be, prominent in it. So that's why we wanted to target that. And every time we had scoped out the base, we found out the B-52s were only what they called a deadly force area. If you remember, the B-52s used to be on alert at the end of the runway, ready to go take off in a moment's notice to bomb Russia in case there was a nuclear exchange during the Cold War. And there was a whole string of these B-52 bases all across the northern part of the country. Like New York, New Hampshire, Michigan, North Dakota, Montana, all the way across Washington State. And this was the base in New York State, Rome, New York. And every time we looked into the deadly force area, it was usually during the day, there was a bevy of activity in there. There were like security vehicles and all kinds of activity going on in this area of the base that we had to actually look through binoculars to see it. It was so far away from where we were. And Kieran and Wanda said, well, could we get in there? Could we get to the B-52? And I said, well, I don't know. We just went by faith. And Phil Berrigan, who was really the father of all these actions, used to always say that when you go forward in faith, the waters part. And so sure enough, in this action, we had been talking a lot in run-up to the action that what would we have done if we were in Germany or in Poland during the 40s? And how would we react? Would we take up train tracks? Would we try to go to the death camps and hammer on things and render that property useless because it has no right to exist, to exterminate people? And somewhere, and I've never seen the print, but Dorothy Day is credited with saying that in the 40s we brought the people to the ovens, but during the nuclear age now we bring the ovens to the people. form of China submarines and missile silos and B-52 bombers. And so we decided, we had thought about it, and Karen and Mohana were thinking that the runway is equivalent to train tracks, because you can't wait till the bomber is in the air to stop it. You got to stop it before it gets off the ground. So the thought was, the accident turned out being is that we dropped Karen and Mohana off first. It was about 6:30 in the morning, but it was still a bit dark because we were talking upstate New York, and very cold, and we dropped them off on the end of the runway. And they had a splitting wall. It's one of the biggest hammers in the Plowshares movement. There's others that are bigger, like Peter DeMont's van when he ran the submarine. But he had a splitting wall, and they were only had to cut through one fence and go across the perimeter road. And all these SAC bases, Strategic Air Command bases where they have nuclear weapons, they have a road around the whole perimeter at the base that they constantly have security vehicles patrolling. And so they got across the road, cut through the fence, across the road, and they started taking up a portion of the overrun of the runway. You know, the whole idea of these actions and nonviolence is to threaten human life. And we didn't know if a plane would have to land or something, so that's why you didn't go to the middle of the runway and take up a hole, because it would be so counterproductive to have a plane coming for a landing and crash because of us. And so they did spray paint in big letters on the runway, no more bombing of children, Hiroshima, Vietnam, Iraq, or anywhere, and in like day-glow orange spray paint. And then on the overrun of the runway, they started hammering, taking up the runway. Well, after we dropped them off, we came around to the other end of the base, where the B-52s were on alert in the deadly force area. And Stu and I got out of the car, made our way up to where the fences were, where I looked with binoculars, and we looked inside, and there was like nothing happening. It was like very quiet. Of course, it was, you know, like I said, New Year's morning. And so we cut through a fence, went over the perimeter road, cut through another chain link fence that we didn't even see there. And then we went another, I don't know, 50, 100 yards to a fence that housed the deadly force area. And we got up to the fence, and at this point we're totally exposed by the perimeter road, so we had to just keep going. We get up to this fence, and there's a cable running through it, an electrical cable, and it's running through the fence and down inside, right inside the fence into a box that's a danger high voltage. And I thought, what do we do now? You know, so we had these great bolt cutters, and I hit the fence a couple of times, tapped it to see if I would feel a shock or if there'd be sparks or something, and nothing. So we cut through the fence and went through. And now we found out late afterwards, with the investigation the Air Force did from Offutt Air Force Base, which was where Strategic Air Command headquarters was, that they reenacted the whole thing, and that the fence indeed is censored to set off an alarm in a tower that overlooks this whole deadly force area. And of course, they go through and test it regularly, and it worked before we cut through, and it worked after we cut through, but somehow it malfunctioned when we cut through. And so this like, that's again like, you know, we go forward in faith, the water's part, or the fences don't work, whatever case it may be. So then we went and had to walk across this basically huge runway area that's like a parking lot for B-52s. And these are massive planes, if you've ever seen them. They're just massive, they turn around there. And so we just walked across as if we owned the place, because we didn't want to sleuth or something. First of all, we're not guerrillas, we're not trained as guerrillas, and there was nothing to hide behind anyhow. So we just walked across, and like it's one of those times in your life when you just remember exactly, like if it's, I can picture it right now, and as I'm walking through, I'm kind of saying a mantra, saying, oh my God, and part of that was, oh my God, we might get shot. I don't know where these guys are with the guns, but they're in there, and because they're authorized deadly force to shoot any intruders. And so we're walking through, and so I just arm in arm, totally exposed, and over to the left-hand side, there's like these airplane hangars with baseball stadium lights on them, which we found out later on is where B-52s were, that then they would arm and get in the air in case there was a nuclear exchange with Russia. And that was all lit up. And then on the right-hand side, there's a security building with this guard tower, which I didn't know what it was then, but there was all these vehicles in front of that. and the B-52s were right in front of us. And so we just kept walking, and we finally got into the right wing of the first B-52. And when we got into that wing, we saw headlights come on that were, the security jeep was sitting behind the middle B-52. There were 3 B-52s at the end of the runway. And so we just started hammering, and we poured our own blood, because the whole idea is to mark the bomber for what it is, and to provoke a crisis with the people who fly that bomber, that from 30,000 feet in the air, they don't see the blood that they shed on the ground. And so it's an idea of bringing the consequences of one's action to the bomber. And it's the same thing as pouring blood to Pentagon, same great action, eminently truthful action. And so we hammered and poured blood, and it's like everything went in slow motion. I'm hammering, and I could see underneath the bomber because they're huge. And the Jeep didn't come right at us, but it came around the left wing and around the nose of the plane. And by the time it came to us, we had knelt down, dropped our hammers because we didn't want them to be misconstrued.
Okay, I want to interrupt you here because Sue kept trying to get him to stop. He said, "This is where we stop so that they don't shoot us." And Bill's going to finish. He's got all these pieces of Nuremberg trials and all that stuff that he wants to put out. So she's getting a little nervous. They're not married yet, but this is kind of a little interchange that finally you did kneel down.
Yes, and didn't get shot. But they came up with the security chief then with their headlights on us and high beams and blinding us, and they came out with guns yelling at us to shut up, because we felt we had to speak to them right away, because again, this base is on war readiness alert, and we didn't want them to misconstrue us as somebody else other than human beings just like them. And so we started talking right away, saying, just talk to them, saying, don't be afraid of us, we're unarmed, we're here on the day of peace, January 1st is the day of peace. The Pope even puts out a message on that day. And so they made us walk away from the plane, and they wouldn't let us turn around and look at them. They had us, they were behind us with the guns then. And we told them that they should check another plane, because when we came right through the fence immediately, there were these refueling planes that allowed the B-52 to fly so far. And actually, bombers from that base did go and fly. They were based in England and refueled and bombed in Iraq and got back that way. So we told them to check that plane out, because we had poured blood and hammered on that too. And they're saying, shout, and cursing us and all. And so they started walking us across the tarmac towards the security building with our hands up. And that's the first time I realized it was about 4 degrees out. My hands were freezing. Every time I put our fingers down, I said, put your fingers up. And so Sue told me later on that she was convinced we were going to get shot, because I wasn't shutting up. I just kept talking. And finally we broke into a song, and they stopped telling us to shut up. And I think it was some pieces flowing like a river or something, just simple song. And it was like echoing through this whole Deadly Force area, and it was completely quiet. And they got us to this outdoor pen, and it was chain linked, and they took our coats off and had us hold on to the chain link fence while they made the most massive, thorough frisk I've ever had in my life. I don't know if you've ever been frisked by the military, but this guy was barking out as he's going around my body, right upper quadrant clear, sir! And he's going around the whole body, and he handcuffed me, turned me around, and this is the first time I was able to see everyone, and there's about 15 MPs there, with berets and camouflage and M16s pointed at us, and they're like, and I was so elated that we had not gotten shot, that we had gotten to the bomber, and that Phil Berrigan would probably be proud of us. And so I said, Happy New Year, everyone! And slowly the guns came down. And so they took Sue and I to a security building somewhere on the base, and they had a guard in the hallway. They put us each in a separate room, walking up down a hallway with a gun. And now the military and the authorities, you can't underestimate how sometimes they are not that sharp. And we had brought on the base an indictment because we knew we were going to be indicted. And so we indicted Daddy Bush and everyone down the line for crimes against humanity, etc. And also we brought a statement of who we were. and there were 4 signatures on the bottom. And it took them a while to realize. They came in and said, "Are there more people on the base?" It must take about 20 minutes to realize there might be more people on the base. So, we didn't say anything, I just shrugged my shoulders. And so they went into high gear, you could hear the radios going. And so now, meanwhile, we're back at the other end of the base. Karen 1 are still there working on the runway. And now with security cars, they keep going around. When they keep going around the base, when they see headlights coming, they would drop the splitting wall, and they pick up this big banner that was like 2 sheets long saying, "Beat swords in the plowshares." And they picked up the banner, and the car came close, came by them, and then drove out of sight. And so they put the banner down, they take the hammer, they start hammering some more on the runway, and a car comes in the other direction. And so they drop the hammers again, and they pick up the banner, and the car does the same thing, comes in sight, past them. And they said about 4 or 5 cars went past without stopping. Incredible. And it wasn't until a car came up the runway and saw them and arrested them. And that was one of the policemen they put on the stand during our trial in federal court in Syracuse. And it was so interesting because the prosecutor asked him, "What did you see?" And he said, "I saw a man doing a plowing-like action on the runway." That's pretty interesting.
Beating swords into plowshares.
Thanks so much, Bill. One of the more dramatic ones when he said, "Happy New Year," and everybody just